Now, of course, I'm really happy to meet all of you, but there's a little bit too many. There's also a drawback to being a big group, Tanya. But that's why I want to ask you a few questions, so I get a little bit to know about you guys. I understood you're in your 4th year, more or less. So I'd love to know who would continue studying after this year or after you graduate, whenever that is. How many would like to continue? Okay, can't really see, but about 1/3, half. And how many already?
Can you put your mic a little bit closer because I can't really hear.
Oh really? Is it that bad? Ooh. Or put up the volume? Okay.
Is that better? Maybe.
I always hear I'm pretty loud, but maybe not for Rotterdam standards. Yeah. All right. So the other question I had is, who has work experience already? Let's say more than like 3 to 4 months internships, or almost everyone, not everyone. Because I'll mention a lot of examples, and if you've worked somewhere, then maybe you can relate to it a little bit more. If you don't, just raise your hand or tell me to explain a little bit more. Or, but I hope you recognize a lot of the things. Now, Tanya has told you this whole lecture is about failure. That's of course not really true, but just to keep you awake. But the first question I have to you that relates to the presentation is, please close your eyes, just for a short period, and think about a recent failure. Yeah? Doesn't matter what it is. Just close your eyes, think about something, let's say in the past year, that you would call yourself, not somebody else, you would think of as a failure. Yeah, ready? Open your eyes when you're ready. Yeah? Now, I want to see hands for which of you was that positive experience? None, right? So for who? One positive experience, yes. So the rest is negative or neutral? Who's negative? For who was it negative experience? Okay. Okay, the whole thing about this is that for most people, and I even read somewhere, for smart people it's even worse, failure is considered something negative. And the story of today is that actually you should reach out for failures because you learn from it. I'm sure you've heard that before. But there's actually ways and methods where you can actually look for failure. And I'll explain why that is very useful in business. So what will we cover today? I've seen quite a bit, not quite successful to point-blank failures. If you talk to startups, and there's quite a bit of them, especially in the Netherlands, in Europe in general, but especially in the Netherlands, most of them are technical or digital because it's a lower barrier to start and less money to start often. 70% of them fail. And the way people look upon it is after financing rounds, it's usually loans to start a company. So this is within 2 years, maybe they've had a longer stretch, but 2 years after they really started burning money, they're dead. Then 50% of the startups, so imagine some startups that you may know about, half of them don't make it through the 5th year. And then if we really talk, which is a favorite topic of mine, then okay, you've got a product, you've got some customers, but then how do you become successful? You have to grow, right? But if you really talk about scaling, and the unicorns as we call them, you all know the Ubers, the Airbnbs, those are pretty rare as you can imagine, and you see it also from the numbers. Not even 1% makes it beyond $10 million. Now these are all statistics, but just to give you the purpose of failing. Would you rather just start it and then die, or would you rather learn a few lessons before you really start burning the money? I think the latter. Yeah. Now, they use the same idea, which is the core also of lean startup methodology, is you have to hit all three circles. If you only go for the super happy consumer, if you only go for desirability or whatever you want to call it, the super happy consumer, then of course you might go bankrupt because you forgot to ask them money for what you're doing. And actually a lot of the apps run that risk because they're really floating on advertising money on the app. Then of course you have to be able to make it. Now if it's a tangible product, like a bike, then it's fairly easy maybe. But of course in the digital world, you could fail a number of times before you really have the ideal product that consumers are truly happy with. And the viability is really all about the money. Have you seen these kind of things before, or most of you have, huh? So then I can go quickly. Now the other thing that relates a little bit to failure is, and I like this saying, is that what I notice when you talk especially to startups, but also to innovators or new product development people, people tend to fall in love with the solution. So think about, maybe you have people around you or you yourself are in a startup, or you know people who had a great idea and starting it, or a new shop or a new restaurant, and you really fall in love with what you're doing. And I also recognize it as a product marketeer. You're working on the next new best thing and you're getting into it more and more and more, and that's what drives you, and that's the joy of your day-to-day life. But if the real consumer problem in the cities is actually not the fact that they don't have a bike, or the bike, the tires are not good, or the chain breaks all the time, but this is the issue. Your bike gets either stolen or bashed, or this is how you find it, and you're sick of it because it's your third bike in your 4th year of studying. You have had many bikes to get there. Then it doesn't really help if the solution is some lubricant for the chain, right? And of course I make it a funny example, but this is what truly happens. Think about it next time somebody talks to you about a good idea. The one thing I always try to probe for is, what is the problem it is solving? Because very often there are other solutions already. Now, if you've known a thing or two about lean startup ideas, so there's methodology for that too, and within lean startup, very often it's called design thinking. Now, I never ever understood why it's called design thinking until I had a seminar at IBM, of all places, where they explained it that you can do brainstorms until you die, but if you do that in a visual way, the understanding and getting together with the same idea is much bigger. So one of the methods behind it, I think I put a slide in there, then I'll come back. Yeah, the method behind it is that you actually go into the shoes of the customer that you think about. So whether it's this swap bike customer or your ice cream shop, doesn't really matter. But what does the consumer actually go through when using your products? So I'm not talking about the purchase decision, but really, if I go on my bike to a class, how many of you came here by bike, by the way? It's raining. Only me? Very, very few. Okay, I'll stick in some other examples. But so if you use a hairdryer, or you want to eat an ice cream, you go through a couple of phases, right? Now, it's a method where you actually draw out what the consumer goes to and then try to get inspired where the barriers and the drivers are of things that maybe are not solved. So, for instance, you might then come up with an idea of ice cream delivery to home. Doesn't happen yet, does it? Well, anything could be delivered to home, but you know what I mean. So then there's this way of really getting to the core. Then, of course, you do the brainstorm in the middle. And there comes the prototype that I've called before. Yeah, you could make a minimal viable, or just a touch of what the product might be in the end to test it out. And now, a little bit back to failure. How can you then build it in such a way that it really adds value? Because the idea is often easier than if you really build it. And this is what I've mentioned before. If you test it at an early stage, fail fast is something you may have read about in lean startup terminology. You actually can do the loop. And if it's a digital product, it's very easy to measure. So if you start a new app, you can just measure the clicks. Or if you put something like a website on there that's not even the final one, at least you can already measure if people are even looking at it, if they click through, if they throw anything in the basket. There's some legal limits there what you can do, but you can build something already in the early stage to see if your idea works or not, right? And then, did I leave that slide in? Yeah. If you do this, and this is a tough one, also in big corporates, I'm trying to do this when we are at the early stage of development, I'm trying to also use this, then agree with the team what success looks like. Because what very often happens is that you, like I'm working for Bugaboo now, and of course there's a lot of new strollers in the pipeline. There's strollers for babies or young kids, if you don't know the brand. Then the normal testing being done is that, yeah, the stroller is not quite ready yet, so they get young mothers to just drive around with the stroller. And then, of course, if you're really in love with your solution, it's very often fine, huh? So maybe you've developed a new canopy and you're completely focused on whether the canopy does well, but you forget about that the best drive, which is what Bugaboo is known for, that it's really easy to maneuver, etc., is of course still very important. So you have to make a list. What does success look like? So the example of the ice cream shop, although it's raining, if you say 5 ice creams per day, sold per day, is good enough for me to be successful, fine. Then that's what you go after. But if you don't agree on that, one might think, oh, 5 is fine, while you know that for the business case, to get profitable, to pay the bills, you may need 15. So define and agree upon with your colleagues what success looks like, otherwise you cannot fail. And then, of course, dare to fail, because no one likes this. No one likes to go back to whether it's senior management, your investors, your colleagues, and say, well, actually, we did a trial last Friday, and it was a complete fuck up. Sorry for the name, but actually, who follows Sprout, it's about startups, scale-ups, and fuck-ups. Dare to fail. Dare to say, okay, we learned, it didn't work, fortunately, it's not in the market yet. Let's continue. The things to remember next time, if you have a good idea or a good friend has a good idea, it's always about making consumers super happy. By the way, who exactly is this customer? Embrace the problem, not the solution. Ask why a lot of times. Dare to fail fast, we've been through that. And if you want to build the strongest version, I put up the few formats that maybe look a little bit boring, but help to really build the strongest version of your plan. And keep improving all the elements that are in there. And yeah, last but not least, you can apply it to anything.